Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Product Design podcast. For those of you who don't know or couldn't guess by the title, this is a series of talks where I'll be picking the brains of industry experts exploring different topics within product and design. I have the pleasure of being joined by Dr Shashi Thandra, and today we'll be exploring the two main topics of product management and product designer relationships, and also the hiring process of product managers. Shashi, again, pleasure having you on here. Please could you just start by giving a quick overview of you and your career so far?
Yeah, thanks, Matt, for having me on. I'm really excited about the conversation. So, personally, quick bio and then kind of run through highlights. So, I was born in India and I lived there until I was 9. But I moved to the US at that point and lived in Detroit for that time and went to school there and did everything. But culturally, and everything I say and speak and everything I do is very, very American. And fundamentally, what that means for me is like I'm very, very optimistic about the future. That's really what
Yeah.
I did a doctorate in literature and culture. I taught in Detroit and really enjoyed that experience. I really love building and helping people develop. It's been a core passion of mine the entire time. But I wanted to work in teams. The humanities generally has a lone researcher model, and for me, building in teams is a lot more significant, a lot more close to my core powers, and I wanted to do that. So I went into tech. I worked at Wells Fargo Advisors. It's kind of the major highlights. Enterprise setting, but we did have a chance to build something really cool, a robo-advisory platform from the ground up, which was a lot of fun, great partnerships across, a lot of excitement. I got recruited into the product team and worked there to run the mobile application. That was also a really interesting experience because you're working within constraints of the enterprise, but still trying to serve a really diverse range of customers. And that was really interesting, and where design and accessibility actually played a major role. So hopefully we may be able to chat about that.
Yeah.
The and then moved to Germany because my wife is German, and we have our 5-year-old, and we
Yeah.
wanted to raise her here. So did that. Worked at Deposit Solutions most recently, and we actually launched in the U.S., which is a funny leave the U.S., go sell for the U.S. or build for the but that was a really, really significant experience. Went through the pandemic, all the ambiguities of that, and we still launched in the US, did a lot of iterations and kind of got a lot more market traction there. It was really significant. And
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely. And obviously, Deposit Solutions being acquired or merged with Raisin recently.
Right. The
Yeah.
one European champion has been the lighthouse in that merger, and that's a really, really right idea. I mean, a really unique value proposition, really unique in the market, a chance to actually do something significant in the US, which is not something that very many European fintechs can claim to do, right? So
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, really, really exciting, both businesses, and they're doing extremely well at the moment. But yeah, so to jump in head first, straight into it. First topic we obviously wanted to discuss was, I think, a big topic in across product, really, because I think the relationship between product managers and product designers is very key. A lot of the time, the team structures that we're seeing these days, it's heavily cross-functional collaboration between product managers and designers. So I think it's a key area to discuss. So, I mean, first and foremost, what do you believe to be a good or a great relationship between designers and product managers?
yeah, it's you're right. One of the most foundational parts of the product relationship right now. So when I say product relationship, I think of product development. So design, technology, marketing, all the other kind of pieces that go into it. But design specifically, I really look for co-ownership. I mean, I think a healthy relationship means these kind of bullet point descriptions of the product owner manager being a CEO of the product is like okay, but CEOs are always in a collaboration with a lot of others. That's why there's an entire C-suite, there's an entire advisory
Yeah.
board, all of that. So a product designer needs to be exactly that, right? A co-owner, a somebody who brings a unique and disciplinary perspective to things, but also brings a really strong user perspective in ways that challenge any given solution, right? So I've been in situations where I've fallen in love with my own solution and wanted to kind of keep moving that forward. And then my best designers were like, yeah, I get it, but like, what do our users actually want? Let's
Mm,
go do some research around it. Let's
mm,
get some actual data around it. And for me, it's a really healthy challenge. It's something that I really benefited from. I think those are really crucial relationships. The other thing I want to say about that is that one of the things that has to be a hallmark of this is giving design the space to think greenfield and the space to think genuinely forward, right? It cannot be just reactive to things happening, but very, very forward looking and challenging and bringing in new ideas and solutions into that. That's where you have a dynamic relationship. That's where you have both parties engaging, moving forward, like, otherwise you get stuck, right? You get stuck in
mm.
existing paradigms, existing expectations, etc., not moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with both points you've made there. I think the startups of the world that we're seeing these days, I think, really focusing on building that type of great cooperative relationship between the PMs and the product designers. I think, as you said, sometimes as a PM, or in larger businesses from higher up, there becomes an idea, and that idea gets so fixated on that designers have no power or influence over saying, yeah, that could work. However, have you actually assessed what the users want? Have you actually spoken to them? Have you seen any trends that you're seeing with competitors? Have you done any competitor analysis to see what's happening? So yeah, I think that's where some tension can come between the relationships. But as I said, I completely agree. So the points that you made, obviously, it's very important to have these relationships. But how do you think how do you think this relationship is built? What are the core structures to this relationship that mean this? Your relationship with the designer is going to be a success.
Yeah, I'm going to use a cliche, but it's going to be important. So the word transparency and trust
Mm,
are kind of key words there. They can become quickly cliches and buzzwords, but if you have a real sense of that you are both invested in building in the right thing and going forward, then the ability to actually trust each other and feel like they have the best interest in mind is very, very obvious. And I think this is what happens. I think the same thing applies for engineering teams as well, right? There can't be a bifurcation. There can't, well, in this case, a trifurcation. I don't know if that's a word, but you know what I'm saying,
yeah.
right? That needs to be really, really fundamentally in place. The fundamentals of that's one of the core parts of the relationship. And the second is about transparency and specifically about humility. For me, there's needs to be in my product group, and we may talk about this later, a
Mm,
deep sense of curiosity and a deep sense of humility, because
mm,
the design team should be bringing a new discipline and new insights that you just don't know of. And if there's a genuine space and safety to express those things, you have a strong relationship. If there's a sense of I'm taking requirements and executing against those, right?
yeah.
It's not moving it's not moving them forward. It's not moving you forward. It's not moving the product forward. It's just collapsing, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think obviously from speaking to a lot of product designers day to day, I think the big thing about it's a very creative role, right? They're very creative people and they are problem solvers essentially. The whole role is based on solving problems and coming up with designs that solve those issues. And I think if you take away that creative side of it where they don't really have influence or can't put forwards their own ideas for things, then they're essentially just a visual designer, if you like, or they just make things look good to look at, but they don't have influence. And I think the business side of the design role has become massive of recent, the real business aspect to it and I think that's where we're seeing the trend of having dedicated research teams now as opposed to just having product designers that do both. I think that separate function of having dedicated researchers to do that part of it is a big role that plays in them having a huge business impact as designers. But I completely agree, transparency is key. What do you think gets in the way sometimes of that, these relationships not becoming successful? Obviously, one thing you said there was it becomes requirements based. You're just passing on messages essentially, and then just saying go, build it from this. But what else do you think gets in the way sometimes?
it's it's situational or it's contextual. So it's not just a one-to-one relationship, but the entire matrix in which you're working. So if you're in a very sales-driven organization, if you're in a marketing-driven organization, you have almost by necessity different pressures and different
Mm,
relationships you have to build in order to do that. So at the where it starts to degrade, where there's challenges, is if you as a product team or as a technology team don't have sufficient support and ability to push back against every feature request that's coming
mm,
in, right?
mm.
There's that relationship. It's
Yeah.
like, do this thing in order to close this sale. If you don't have enough support and pushback to be able to do that, then this relationship starts to break down quite a bit, right?
Mm,
So that's a really, really important challenge. And the second is if there is not the trust that you each the in each other's efforts, right, in each other's quality of work, then you need to that's where you need to have direct conversation, you need to have challenges, and otherwise you're kind of holding stuff back, not
mm,
it's just degrading everywhere,
mm.
right?
Yeah. Do you think that egos sometimes get in the way of things? Because for me, yeah, for me, I speak to a lot of product designers, a lot of product managers. The market itself doesn't come across to me too much as being an egotistical environment, right? I think a lot of product managers, a lot of product designers are all very open people, again, creative. They want to achieve great things in their life. I come from a sporting background myself, so I've been around around egos for sure. But do you think sometimes the ego can play a part in that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can speak personally. The
Yeah.
example I just mentioned earlier, where I've gotten caught up in my own solution, is precisely that, right? Is
Mm,
that I figure something out. Oh, okay, you didn't,
mm,
and that's a really important part of it. But this is why curiosity and humility are so fundamental to how you work and what you're going to bring to the table. That this is the absolute part of it. As you said, I haven't seen so much of that going forward, but
mm.
there's different ways an ego can manifest, right? Which is what I said about being
Yeah,
stuck in
sure.
solutions, stuck in methodologies, right? Or not being able to feel like you have enough space in an organization to actually flex any powers, in which it's the opposite side, which is you don't have too much ego, you don't have enough confidence to actually propose anything, and then your own like professional capabilities and
Mm,
everything else start not necessarily deteriorating, but they're
yeah.
not flourishing, right? They're not
Mm.
blossoming, and that's an issue too.
Yeah, I think that goes back to your point about creating that transparent environment. I think it's about creating an open environment where no matter what seniority level people are, you want your juniors, you want your mid levels to be able to tell the seniors, to be able to tell the leads that they think this should happen, or they've had an idea. Let's explore it. I think hierarchies are probably a different conversation altogether in companies, but yeah, I agree with what you said there. So I know you had interesting role, obviously being director of product at Deposit Solutions, but you had the interesting role of managing designers yourself, so being their direct report essentially. Now you don't come from a design background, right? So I just wanted to, yeah, just explore that topic really a little bit more in terms of how did you find personally managing the designers, and how did you work work in a way where, because they are designers themselves, how did you work with them not coming from a design background to come to efficient, effective design decision making?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and especially because designers are very egotistical, right? Yeah. Uh, it's a challenge because, but this is so core to the cross-disciplinary function of a team,
Mm,
right? You're working with people that have a significantly different and higher expertise than you
mm,
in a lot of ways. So there's some part of it that where you need to be a study and a strong enough stakeholder, a strong enough relationship that you can actually spar with them. Because if a product designer feels like they're consistently educating you, like month after month, it's like you're not doing it right.
yeah.
So a really strong sense of humility coming into what they're doing, But the other thing is there is design proper as a discipline, and then there is the kind of curiosity and the situation you can create in which you can have people flourish too, right? So yes, you're coming from this discipline, but I want you to bring and talk about new ideas, new concepts, new things, that experiences that have wowed you recently. Like bringing those kinds of things coming in really kind of help that develop. And in terms of decision making, this is where it can get really difficult, because you do have that moment where it's like we've generated a lot of ideas, but we have that raw moment where you have to say what's in the first iteration, what's in even the second iteration, right? And those that becomes, that can be a tough conversation, because
Mm.
you like things, you want to make things happen, you want to produce innovative things, and that can be a challenging process. But this is where stepping back and just being one of the big design challenges actually, that I had a great insight from the head of UX that I had, that I was partnering with. Her feedback was, as soon as a design leaves you, it's just in the world, and it has to live on its own merit, right? Don't get so attached to its own decision, and which means it can die in a decision making process. It can die in a prioritization process. And the best designers I've worked with are completely acknowledge that whatever egos think or other things are just
Mm.
kind of a little bit side away, because they want the best thing for the product development, the best thing for going forward, the best thing commercially, the best thing, all of those things have to be there. So yeah, that's about my sense of it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think it goes back to something you mentioned before about the environment and the context, the actual company that you're working in. I think depending on what their motivators are, I think, as you said, with sales driven, with marketing driven, yeah, obviously every business is there to make money essentially, but it's how important that making money is to them over, creating an environment where, designers and product managers can have a great relationship, because their ideas are valued equally. Okay, great. Well, yeah, look, that sums up the first topic for sure that we wanted to cover off. Now, obviously, you've been in a hiring position yourself. You have experienced different processes, probably based on which company you've been at and which type of position you're hiring for. Now, specifically more towards product managers, because obviously that's more what you would have been hiring for in your role, necessarily. What do you look for first and foremost? So from, let's say, first introduction of a CV, right? What do you look for in that CV to say, yeah, that product manager looks interesting to me?
Yeah, if the one of the things you first noted was the situation in which you're hiring for.
Mm,
So I've been in organizations where delivery has been the first and foremost thing. So if I see a CV that's been heavy on the discovery side, I have to put that to the side, because they'll be unhappy in the situation that I have in
mm,
front of me, right? So in that kind of situation, I need to look for, let's start with that example. I need to look for somebody who's very delivery focused, and that so it's got to align to the
mm,
skill.
mm,
I need to balance that then with what is the longer term vision of this, right? So, okay, they're strong on the delivery side, but if we want to make the entire organization product led, then I need a different balance there. Versus I don't see any prospect of that happening, and I just need to focus on this kind of skill sets going forward. So that initial alignment is absolutely foundational. Uh, the second part of it is I'm actually quite curious during that CV and during the initial conversations about the larger range of interests and other things that they're expressing, right? So if I see on people's CV, I saw somebody's CV the other day that said they were uh, have been weightlifting for 12 years,
mm,
are an avid rock climber, or do this kinds of things. I'm like, this is somebody who's really engaged in the world. That's
mm.
wonderful. Like
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. If on the other hand you have some cliche lines, it can,
Mm,
it's
mm.
a yellow flag, not a
Yeah.
deal. You know.
Yeah, yeah, sure. It's a really interesting point, actually. I think that gets ignored quite often and probably doesn't even get looked at half the time, because generally, hiring managers, understandably, have lots of other things to do other than just sit there and screen CVs all day. But I think you can tell a lot about a person from, what they write, how they talk about themselves on paper, how they talk about themselves during an interview, and of course what their personal interests are outside of their job. Um, how do you, because I've seen a lot of CVs in my time. Now, obviously, I know I've worked with you personally on a few bits from a CV perspective. I obviously made the point to you about a lot of. I think you did it very well initially on your CV. I think there's a few bits we added, as I mentioned, but I think there was points that I made to a lot of people that it's about trying to differentiate yourself as much as possible to make you an individual on that bit of paper than as part of the engineering team, the product team, the design team there. Because I always say this to everyone, if you're, let's say you're a product manager, right? Or you're a product designer. So a product designer in a team of 8 designers that work at the same company, generally you're all going to be able to write similar things that you're doing or working on, depending on what product you're working on, but generally your tasks and responsibilities could be outlined as quite similar. But a lot of people miss the key components of the accomplishments during their role and the results of what their work actually was. Now, it's confusing because you think, well, why wouldn't you show how good you are? Because you're literally, that's what you're portraying yourself as to be. You're interviewing for a role, you want to show how good yourself. I think it's a case between not wanting to look too boasty or big-headed when you're talking about yourself, but also just the fact of not really realizing that you're doing it. I think it's very easy to do it on a CV. It's very easy to do it on like an introductory interview or something like that, because generally they're quite laid back and they're relaxed. And then when you're asked about, tell me a little bit more about yourself and your role, you just give a very quick, snappy, general overview of what you've done. However, pretty much everyone misses out the key parts that makes them stand out from the crowd. If you miss out those accomplishments and results that you've had during that time, as I said, it's very hard for someone in a hiring situation to say, well, I don't know what makes this person different to the other 7 designers they work with and the other 10 designers that I've got CVs and portfolios for at the minute, or something like that. But what's your take on what needs to be included in a CV?
Yeah, it's a challenging one. Again, a little bit contextual, but some of the key things I'm looking for, right? Aside from the curiosity and broader range I'm thinking about, are these people consistently thinking about business outcomes? So there's got to be some kind of dotted line between the work and some kind of commercials, or at the very least, some metrics, proxy metrics that allow you to say, this moved X, Y, or Z, right? And at the moment of writing the CV, that can actually be a difficult thing to do if you're not aware of what you're doing, right? That's one of the key things, and this is where product and design really have a strong partnership. Is not only what you're trying to accomplish for the user, but what are you trying to establish and create an outcome for the business itself, for the product. And if you can demonstrate that on an active basis, you're doing a couple of things. One is, yes, of course, showing that you have results and quantifiable, measurable results. But the second is you're also demonstrating that you have a strong ongoing engagement with what we're trying to accomplish holistically, right? Sometimes you can get kind of narrowed on a product or a thing, but rather thinking a little bit more holistically about what are we actually trying to accomplish here. Overview. If this was your business, what would you be focusing on if you were, and that's a really important perspective, actually. The worst CVs I've seen are people who talk about the deliverables, right? X, Y, or Z, and it's like, what did that do, right?
Yeah,
Do you know what that
exactly.
did?
Yeah.
Like do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that it leads perfectly on from what I mentioned in terms of just missing out the key. As you said, if there's quantifiable metrics that you can put in the results or the accomplishments, great, because I think every hiring manager, I think as humans, if we're reading a page, numbers, percentages, everything stands out, so you instantly get drawn to that anyway. However, it is a reflection of your work and what you've done. I think it's important to, more so in interviews, I'd say, but in CVs as well, I think it's good to show individual contributions and team contributions. I think in interviews it's more important because your CV is personal to you. But generally everyone you're going to be hiring is going to be working in a team of some sort, probably. So it's good to show that. Something came to mind. What's your opinion on changing your CV per role that you're applying for. So if there's a job description, say you're applying for 3 roles, they're all looking for slightly different things, but you know you have experience in those certain things. Do you believe you should change your CV to and tailor it per role that you're looking for, or do you think you should keep the same CV no matter what the role is?
Yeah, it's a good question, but for me, the situation is about what are the companies you're looking at, right? So if the three companies are, it depends on your level of passion for each, right? So if I'm applying for, let's say, a tech giant that I really want to be a part for, yes, you should focus on spending some
Yeah,
time on
yeah.
tailoring that CV and addressing the core problems that you've listed in the JD. Everything else, right? You need to be tailored to that. However, you do need to be conservative and smart about the time that you use across the thing. If I see a CV that has clearly not read the JD at all and is
Yeah.
just, you can tell it's just a fire and forget kind of situation, that doesn't work. So you got to be careful about how you balance those two things. But I
Sure.
do believe some of those moments where you have a lot of passion or a lot of interest, you need to take
Yeah.
that. You need to step back and make that.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think it's an interesting point. I think, yeah, I think it's about prioritizing the roles that you're going for. I think the ones that you really desperately want and would love, definitely, tailor it as much as you can to the job description. But I think if you're going to be putting together a generic CV for other companies, it needs to be at least, as we said, a structure where it's not just deliverables that you're showing. It's not just generic tasks and responsibilities that you had. You need to try and make yourself stand out because there's a lot of good people out there, but you can't, someone who doesn't know that you're good, who doesn't know you or hasn't ever worked with you, won't know that you're good just based off your job title or where you work. Because, just because you're, let's say, I don't know, a software engineer at Amazon, for instance, right? That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be better than someone who hasn't worked at Amazon.
Yeah.
But I think that too many people get sucked into I've worked here, which makes me better than other people. But yeah, that's another topic. So in terms of interview process, now this is a topic that's I think quite hot at the moment because of how competitive the market is right now. Now I've obviously worked with a number of businesses. I've seen a lot of different interview processes. Some I have no idea why they are there, and some are really, really good and effective and efficient. Now, from your own personal perspective, I think you could probably give examples of your own hiring process and potential hiring processes that you've been in. What do you think the best interview process is for, let's say, if you're going to hire a product manager? What do you think the process needs to look like to ensure, for one, that they're the right person for the job, but two, not waste too much time on needless interview processes?
Yeah, the worst processes I've had are 8 rounds and just ongoing. I get the need for validation, especially in leadership roles,
Yeah,
absolutely. But at some point, you're actually not only repeating the questions and getting multiple answers, but you're also showing a little bit of a disconnect between the organization, right? Like, do you guys talk to each other because you just asked me the thing, or we're talking about similar concepts, right? So there's three kind of major functions for me. One is that I have to be the initial guardrail, let's say, right? Nobody on the team, nobody else has to be. I have to be there at the forefront to be the primary filter. The next layer is to validate skill sets. So in this case studies and other things have value, but it has to be really time constrained, right? Like two to
yeah,
3 days, absolute maximum of 7 days, but just show me like thought process, show me how you're going to address the problem, not this massive presentation. It's just way too much time, especially when you don't comp people from that time. I've seen people who've actually comp people for that case
yeah,
study. That's really, really smart thing to do.
mm,
But given the market, as you said, it's just
yeah,
maybe not possible. The last thing, at least in terms of process, is that you need to have a dialogue with the broader team. It's such an obvious thing, but I've actually been a part of several leadership processes where that doesn't happen. And it
yeah,
strikes me as really bizarre, right? It's like, wait, who am I supposed to lead and how? Or in the case of a
yeah,
design, who am I supposed to work with and how? How am I supposed to make this decision
mm,
about a job without knowing who these people are? That just needs to be there. And that needs to be my ideal process would actually say the team moment, the weighting on that decision is higher than the others because these are the people that have to work with them every single
mm,
day on a much closer basis than even I will have to work with people,
mm,
right? And that would actually, for me, have a trump card, a moment where everybody else says, hey, this is a green light, and they go,
Yeah.
no, like the no stance, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think you're right. I think there always has to be a skills validation. There's no doubt about that. I think play a you play a big risk by not having that in your process, because I've seen processes without them, and obviously some have worked out, but many don't. And that's could have purely been solved by a skills assessment in that interview process. I think some people, I don't know why, some people are very reluctant to do them. I've had people say to me, look, I'm interviewing a few companies. I don't want to do design. I don't have time to do design tasks or something like that. And I mean, if you're going to have that attitude when you're not even at the company, I don't tend to think that they're going to be the right person for those types of companies, because it's just part of the hiring process. I think if they put themselves in the other shoes of a hiring manager, if they had someone they were trying to hire, but someone could talk a really really good game. Some people are amazing at interviews. They're amazing at talking about themselves. But yeah, without any skills validation, you have no idea whether that's just a very good salesperson of themselves or actually a very good person to hire.
It's also, I mean, the other way I would also say is that we need to use that skills validation moment, and I've had to do some obviously myself, and I've had people do them for me. Is you need to take that moment as a chance to research, do best practices, and really leverage that. It's actually a moment where you can increase your abilities, right? It's not just a pointless
Mm,
exercise like that. You can take that as a moment to say, well, this is the way I would approach it. Is that consistently aligned with best practices these
mm,
days? Is this something, sometimes you get so sucked into day to day,
yeah,
you don't necessarily have that industry view. You don't necessarily have a chance to breathe and take a look out. That can be a
yeah.
really interesting moment to develop.
Yeah, sure. I think going back to something you said in your previous answer about not meeting the team sometimes, sometimes you go, you're interviewing for a position and you don't even get the opportunity to meet the other team members that you're going to be working with on a day-to-day basis. Now, again, it leaves a huge risk of things not working out, because it takes one person that you don't get along with or don't see eye to eye with, and that's why people leave positions. People don't leave companies, people leave managers and peers, right? You generally leave positions because managers aren't great. They're not, don't have the visions that you have. They don't let you have the visions that you want to, or your peers, you don't get along with them. They don't see eye to eye with you and things like that. Obviously there's other reasons that do come into play, but it's I see some crazy interview processes before, and I think, as you said, I think the longer the processes go, no matter who you're talking to and with, there's a lot of repeat questions, repeat topics that you're discussing. A lot of the time you'll speak. I think the introductory call is something that's a bit of a grey area for me, because
Hmm.
I think we as a business now use some video software that gives us the chance to send like snippets of candidates answering some interview questions to a hiring manager before they actually meet them. Now, it's designed purely to eliminate a lot of time spent in introductory, like half an hour calls and
Yeah.
something like that, because yeah, I think from an introductory call you get a feel for them, you get to speak to them. It's never really too technical, it's just about the general experience. Now, if you can put all of that footage or all of that interaction that you'd have in that half an hour into a 5 minute condensed video, how much time do you how much time do you save with interviewing tons and tons of candidates? Because you've probably done it, we've definitely done it, where you interview someone, you speak to them for about 5 minutes, and you instantly know, I don't think this person's going to be right for us. But at the end, yeah, end of the day, you still interview them because you want to give them a fair chance. You never know; it could change. They could change your opinion, but generally, you just want to make it a fair point. You don't want to just end it after 5 minutes because you don't think they're right. So, all of that time wasted with candidates is eliminated by that. But I do get the point of having introductory calls. What I don't get the point of is the introductory call that we do. So like me, for instance, I'm working with the client. I have an introductory call for about 45 minutes, an hour with the candidate to qualify them, screen them,
Hmm.
etc. I'll then send over all the notes that I've taken on the candidate, during the conversation, summarize everything they've been doing most recently, i.e., their best achievement, their recent project, salary expectations, notice period, etc. Like details like that. But then they have to go from that call, which is pretty much the same, and then go to a HR call, which adds, I think, an unnecessary stage in that aspect. But I definitely think an introductory call with the hiring manager is still worth it for sure. But I think there's so many clients I've worked with and currently work with that still have HR calls after the call that I've had with them. I get why they're doing it, but I don't think it adds any value to the interview process. I think it's an additional step that doesn't necessarily have to be there. But I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's something I've seen at its worst be a repeat, as you noted.
Mm,
At its best, where an HR person and HR partner can do really well is actually bring as much of the hiring manager's perspective into the forefront as
mm,
possible, right? So if you make that moment actually already a moment where you talk about problem solving situations, where are difficult moments, how have you handled them, how
mm,
have you where team breaks down, just they don't have to be extensive, they're certainly not going to be the level of conversation that I expect to have with somebody,
mm.
but if you can bring even a touch of that together, you succeed a lot,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
There's something really gone there, but that it all depends on
yeah,
that person's skill sets, and
yeah.
actually more how well the HR managers
Mm.
communicated to that person what exactly their needs are.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a tough one because I value, I work with a lot of HR partners, and I value them because they're obviously there to do that job and also screen candidates as well. I think the the bit that slows it down is obviously, the way I work or try and work with clients as much as possible is that I have an equal understanding of the role, the job, the opportunity itself than the HR partner will. So I try and eliminate a step that I deem to be unnecessary if I'm going to speak to them and pitch the role to them. They're excited about it. They want to learn more. There's nothing that the HR partner isn't going to tell them about the company that you wouldn't tell them about the company in that introductory call, right? And that's my viewpoint on it, because I think it is a unnecessary step, because generally these introductory calls could be anywhere between half hour to an hour, right? The exact same timeline that Michael is going to be with them and talking about the exact same things. If if the hiring manager, this is why I think from my recruiter perspective, it is best to have direct contact with the hiring manager, because then it eliminates that extra step that has to happen. Because if I know, okay, I'd say, Shashi, what are you looking for? Tell me what you're looking for. Tell me what you'd like to know about this person to give you a better impression or allow you to make an informed decision on them. And this is where the video technology comes into really good hand, because obviously I can take notes and screen them and take notes from that. But you could ask me, these are the 3 key areas that I need to know about them, problem solving, etc., whatever it might be. And then I can literally send them, I can jump on here and just record it. I can jump on, I can send them something called a solo interview, which then allows them to literally record themselves speaking about those questions. And I think that's where there's so much time, money as well, and effort saved in that particular process. But yeah, that's my
So
viewpoint.
time is a important thing because also candidate time, right?
Mm,
The more hurdles, the worse, right? Especially if there's a quality person that you want to get
mm,
on board. One hybrid approach I've seen that has worked well is the HR partner works interviews with the hiring manager at the same time.
mm,
I thought that worked really well because you get
mm.
the advantage
Yeah,
of having an alternate perspective, somebody to spar with, get some
yeah.
feedback, and challenge your assessment with.
Mm,
Ideally, that's also
mm,
happening. And at the same time, you skip that step, right?
mm.
That's actually the best model I've seen so far. So a combination
Yeah.
of video interview
Mm.
and this relationship, that's worked pretty well.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think it does take out the fact that you have to schedule 2 interviews, because the difference between the first, that, if I spoke to someone, pass them on HR call, pass them on your introductory call with them, that can take 2 weeks, 3 weeks sometimes, depending on availability. So you've lost, 2, 3, you've lost 2 very important weeks of trying to secure someone that's probably going to have 3, 4 other offers that are coming in very, very quickly. So yeah, okay, cool. Last question for you,
Mhm.
Shashi. It's a bit of a funny topic, if you like, but I wanted to just ask you: have you had any? What horror stories have you seen, or what's the worst thing you've seen during you interviewing someone, or you interviewing for a company?
When I was interviewing somebody, though, there was at least one instance that was a complete catastrophe. Actually, two similar ideas. So the first was uh, talking to somebody, initial intros went okay, and then during their explanation of their some experience that they've had, they went into a 10-minute, and I just let this happen because I really want to know where it goes. 10-minute complaint about everything that happened and all the other stakeholders who did something wrong. It was astounding. It was
Yeah.
a theater performance. I was like, what the hell is going on here? And it was amazing. So to the point, and this is kind of crazy, to the point where you could tell their voice was cracking a bit, like near tears. I was like, what the, like, whoa.
Yeah.
It was completely astounding. I kind of let them breathe through this because it turned out into a moment where I was like, okay, this person really needs to let something out here. I just
Yeah.
gave them basically a half-hour call, so not the end of the world.
Yeah.
But I also try to make sure I contact them on LinkedIn and actually said, like, can we talk for a second?
Mm.
Because what you just did exploded any chance you have. If
Mm.
you're going to do that forward, you're going to destroy every opportunity to
Yeah,
go.
sure.
Like taking a moment to give that
Mm.
feedback. You know? But that was, like I said, theatrical, like
Yeah.
Shakespearean. You know, you're like, good lord.
Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, obviously I assume that person didn't get the job, but no, it's an interesting, but it happens more often than not. I think there is a massive issue in interviews to it becomes a bit of a slating session, if you like, of just they
Mm-hmm.
ask you about it usually comes from the question, so why are you looking to leave your employer or something like that, what motivates you to leave, what are the issues you're facing, and it becomes a yeah, it just becomes a session of you just literally going into, digging people out, and it becomes a bit toxic at that point. Whereas I think those types of questions, they're designed to see how you react to it. I think it's designed to show how you approach difficult question, and talking about difficult scenarios that you've seen, but it's about obviously dealing with it in a mature manner as much as possible, highlighting the problems and just saying, these were the issues that I saw. Maybe I had contrasting opinions. I don't feel like my manager's giving me enough opportunity to express. But then it's about trying to create a learning opportunity at that point, I think, of essentially flipping the question a little bit on the hiring manager at that point and saying, what could you do differently in this scenario? Or what do you offer that the company I am working with at the moment? I think it leads me on to a little bit of a next topic, which we don't have time to discuss too much about, but about
Can I
hiring
say,
manager. Yeah,
can I
go
say,
on. Yeah, sure.
so one of the pronouns that I'm looking for in that moment actually specifically is we.
Mm,
So in that moment where you say like the challenge is, okay, somebody around you messed up, something happened that was negative. How are you responding to it? It's a tricky thing because in an interview you have to use the word I to kind of
mm,
stand out a little bit. But at some point you need to demonstrate a we mindset, or
mm,
ideally use that pronoun to say we handled it this way,
mm,
right? And if you're able to get to that moment, you've shown me something quite productive, right?
mm,
And something really important about the way you would handle difficult situations, specifically about also creating the partnerships and creating the kind of collective energy you need to move something forward.
mm,
Never individual failure, like we failed, right? And like
yeah,
that go forward.
yeah,
Nobody cares what happened
mm,
internally. The outside world, that was the customer, the external
mm,
partner, they didn't get it. They didn't get what they needed. So
yeah. No, it's a very good point, and yeah, I completely agree. The last little bit I wanted to say was yeah, about how competitive the market is at the minute. I think hiring managers and companies need to realize that it's kind of flipped at the minute for interviews, to be honest. It's a lot more about them selling themselves as a business and an employer than having the candidate selling themselves to them. Because I think, yes, of course, you have to, it's still the same process. You still have to see whether this particular candidate is going to be good enough to join you. However, there are so many exciting roles at the minute, so many exciting businesses in very similar sectors. The salaries packages, they're forever increasing. It's going going with the times of inflation at the moment. Salaries are massively increasing on average. So I think from an employer's perspective, it's equally as important. And I think it's equally as important not to have very generic, unique selling points about your business. I think, yeah, I think it's such an easy tendency for companies to go, yeah, no, this is why we're great. We offer free fruit and stuff in the office. Like every office does that, right? But I think it's about cutting the shit a little bit at that point and saying that this is why we are a great company. This is why we're a great team. I think it's about also talking about personal opinions, because I think people appreciate personal opinions much more than just generic USPs about companies. I think it's about talking about personal opinions. This is why I decided to join here. This is what I've seen happen. These are the challenges we're facing at the moment. But this is why I believe us to be better than a competitor. This is why I believe us to be the best company to work for at the moment, because of X and Y and Z. As I said, I think the tendency is just to revert back to the standard unique selling points.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Specificities, you're absolutely right. The two things I would say is one, be honest about where you are, because if you are in a bit of a challenging
Mm,
situation, then you need to sell or be very clear about the opportunity to be a change agent, be a person that can move the team forward, or like be clear about your expectations of the role, right? Serves both
mm,
purposes. And the people who want to be the dynamic movement and move
mm,
it forward, be it a change agent, do those kinds of things,
yeah.
you are them. For others, you don't.
Mm,
The second thing is around this is being like an interview, being specific about your examples, right? Tell me you have a development budget, or
mm.
educational budget or something. Cool. But like tell me
Yeah.
about like where like when is the last person, one of your direct reports, actually used it
Yeah.
for what? Like what did you feel like that
Mm,
was useful for? Did you feel like that was a good value for what they
mm,
did, etc.? Like it needs to be concrete, right?
yeah.
Again, like
Yeah.
fruit, ping pong tables, etc. Those days are
Mm,
long over, right?
yeah, for sure. For sure. Cool. Well, look, thanks very much for your time, Shashi. Massively, massively appreciate your time. Always a pleasure. If anyone's watching this that wants a director of product in their company, Shashi is your man.